Good evening to all of you. I will be doing a masterclass on land and how do we think about land when we think about urbanization, the transformations that are happening on land as we move towards different kinds of urban futures. What we are trying to do with these masterclasses is really to give you a bit of a flavor about how we teach at IIHS and in the Urban Fellows program. So, couple of things that are very important to us as we teach. One of them is to bring together research and practice. So we do a lot of research with universities and with think tanks in India and countries around the world. We also do a lot of actual practice projects. We work with the government, we work on policy, work on infrastructure, housing, ecology, lots of different kinds of questions. And the idea for us is that these two must always be in conversation with each other. They have to inform one another. And the material, the teaching material that we bring to the classroom is really sort of, our learnings, our challenges, our key takeaways in bringing together research and practice. The other thing that you will, that is kind of very important to us is interdisciplinarity. So, let's take for an example, if we are taking the city as, our object of inquiry, we want to know more about the city, then there are a lot of different kind of disciplinary lenses that we can use to start asking the questions. We can take a social perspective. Who are the people living in a city? What are their social relationships? An economic perspective, how is the urban economy constituted? What are its elements? We could take an ecological perspective. Many of our cities are facing, flood events almost on an annual basis. What is the cause of that? How is it linked to the way the city is growing? But the idea always for us is that we can never tell what the city is about if we limit ourselves to any one of these disciplinary perspectives. And the idea for us is that even if we enter from a particular disciplinary perspective, we still are looking for the connections, the implications, the intersections, the overlaps, and the ways in which these different things affect each other. And so both of these things I'm going to, you'll hear in the examples that I will be using in the session today as well. And so I will start. So give me a second. I want to share my screen. I hope you're able to see. So what you see on the screen right now is probably one of the most famous pictures that there is about planet Earth. This is a picture that was taken by Voyager 1 as it was about to leave our solar system. And NASA gave it a command to look back one final time and take a picture of home. And Carl Sagan, who is a very famous astronomer, he's also very well known as a communicator of science. He named this picture the pale blue dot. And I hope you can see the arrow that is pointing towards that little pale blue dot. That's us. So all of human history, all of non-human history, remembered, forgotten, all of the people who will come after us, all of the things that will come after us, wanted, unwanted, but it's all there. This is it, the pale blue dot. And the reason why I want to start here is that when we talk about land, it's very important to have this perspective that this is what we have. This is all the land we will ever have. No new land is being made, right? The pale blue dot is our land. Yet at the same time, there is a lot of language that is used in common conversation in which there is an implicit assumption that something new is being made. When a city is growing, a new urban boundary is demarcated. And there is this language that is used that the city is growing outwards. The city itself as an entity has somehow grown into an area which was not a city before, into the peri-urban areas. Or we talk about how land is being reclaimed, say in Mumbai, and a new financial center has been created. This is the Bandra Kurla complex. Or one of the largest, informal settlements, Dharavi, again, land reclamation, or a new coastal road is being built. A lot of this language makes us think that there is something new that is being produced, that is being created. But I want us to just kind of take a step back and think about what we mean when we, use this language of making. When we think about a thing like, say, soap, right? The way that we make it is that a lot of raw materials are put together and then this product is prepared, is produced. And if we need more soap is produced. If we need less soap is produced. But when we're talking about new land, especially, in real estate sometimes or in urbanization, the language uses a new city is being created. A new highway is being created, which is going to open up all of this new land, which is right next to the highway. What we are really talking about is that the spatial connections through which these land parcels are connected to their surrounding areas, to the city, those connections are being made and remade. So for a product, it is raw materials coming together and a new product is being made. And for land, it's new connections coming together and a new kind of land, a new classification of land is created. So, residential land. We need more of residential land, so more residential land is created. We need more commercial land is created. But it is still the same pie. It is still the same pale blue dot. We are just moving things around across this pie and saying more of this, less of that, more of this, less of that, right? So there is this, let's take another example to think through what we mean when we say connections in land. Let's say there is a parcel of land outside the city. It is close enough that it can, the transportation is cheap. It's an agricultural piece of land. So say someone is leasing that land or owning that land, decides to grow vegetables, right? And that vegetable comes to the city, it's consumed, there's a certain price, there's more investment back into the next cycle of harvest, etc. This is a food connection. Similar way, say there is a low-lying area which is on the periphery of the city. Rainwater collects, becomes a lake. Water seeps into the ground, recharges the groundwater system. That groundwater gets pulled up into the city through the bore wells. Right now, I'm speaking from Bangalore, which is facing one of its worst water crisis because the groundwater recharge is not happening. We have not had monsoons. But this example is a water connection. You could similarly have a waste connection, a solid waste disposal site outside the city. You could have labor connections. You could have people coming from outside the city, migrating to come to the city for work. And in that case, it may not even be the immediate region around the city. The region in that case for labor connections may be another state altogether that people are migrating. But it is this idea of connections that helps us understand this is an agricultural piece of land, or it's a lake, or it's a peri-urban area, or it's a place where people are migrating for labor connections. Now, say that same parcel of land is bought and it is made into a residential township. Now, there are people living there. These are people who are also consuming, say, vegetables. But now their vegetables is coming from another land parcel that is located elsewhere. These are also people who might be going to the city to do work. So labor connections are still there, but a very different kind of a labor connection. So in going from agricultural land to, say, a residential township, it's the same parcel of land, but the connections that it has to the city has been completely rewritten and remade, right? This is what we understand as the production of new land. Karl Polanyi, who was a well-known economic sociologist from Hungary, he called land fictitious commodity. Fictitious, why? Fictitious, like, the books we read, there's fiction, there's non-fiction. Fiction basically means that it's not linked. It's something unreal, it's something abstracted. So fictitious commodity. So say comparing again to soap, which is a real commodity. When we need more soap, we make more soap. But when we need more land, we convert land. We remake its connections. And therefore, it's not a real commodity in that sense. So it's a fictitious commodity. This is what he's trying to talk about. So for example, again, to go back to the BKC, it was a marshland. It had a certain functionality associated with it. Flood control, perhaps. Today, it has a different function, a financial center. every time we do urbanization, every time we do land transformation as a part of urbanization, it's this that we want to always keep in mind. With this background, I now want to jump in to how we understand land markets, right? And moving to the next slide, this is one of the ways in which the land market is depicted very often. It's called the bid-rent curve. What it shows, the circles that you see at the bottom of the graph, is a schematic version of a city, right? You have the center, which is called the CBD, the Central Business District. Then as you kind of move out, you have other kinds of uses. In this case, it's showing manufacturing, and then there is residential. What this curve really shows is that the way to read it is that the closer you are to this 0 point, closer you are to the center of the city, and that's where the rents are going to be highest. And that is going to be, affordable for things like retail and commercial. As you move to the edge of the city, as the distance from the center of the city increases, the rent drops, and you have functions like residential, etc., that are there. Now, this is a certain kind of a schematic about how, land markets are supposed to function. It's used quite often. But again, let's take a step back. Let me ask you a question on this. For example, if you have a city which has only a single CBD, then this is how the curve is going to look like. Could you have two CBDs? Could this curve be such that, again, like say drawing from Bangalore, you have the central CBD area, you have the MG Road and, the commercial street, like kind of the center of the city. But then you also have an IT hub, which is in Whitefield and in Sarjapur and Electronic City. And that actually acts as a second CBD. And so you can imagine redrawing this graph, not to have a single node, but to have multiple nodes. But the provocation here is, there is always going to be a height and a trough. It goes up, but it goes down. If I ask you the question, can the entire city become a CBD? I'm hoping your response is going to be no. So this graph is not only a way for us to organize the rent from the middle of the city to the outside of the city in an ordered hierarchy, right? Largest going down to the smallest, but that this hierarchy has connections to each other. You cannot have the high rents that are possible inside the CBD if you do not have the residential. So again, taking an example from Bangalore, housing prices in Bangalore are going up significantly. There are all these newspaper articles that are being written that says, is Bangalore going to start becoming so unaffordable that people will move out of the city, or new areas will have to be opened up, for housing? And what that tells us is that this high rent, which is coming from retail and commercial, is made possible because there is a substructure of residential. If the residential rent curve goes up, then it might have all kinds of implications on this. Maybe these rents drop. Maybe these rents, because there's less demand, because people are moving elsewhere. But, irrespective of the direction in which this movement is going to happen, I want you to keep in mind this, that this is not just a graph of three separate kind of things, sitting next to each other, but three different kinds of things which are interrelated with one another. So what does that actually mean? Let's, again, take a different kind of an example. You have a group of, say, 10 human beings. You can order them by, say, height. It's a kind of ordering which is hierarchical, but it's not a value-driven kind of a thing. I mean, unless there is some reason you will, hire the tallest person or the shortest person or something like that. If you can also organize them into, say, the different languages that they speak. This is a kind of ordering which is based on differences. But there is another way that you could, order them, which is, say, how much salary is every single person getting, right? And so you have someone who's making a lot of money and someone who's not. When you scale this out to a city level, you also see the same relationship. This may be an ordered hierarchy of salary, and we might have all these normative ideas in our head that someone who's making a lot more is working harder or, has more opportunities in life. All of that is true. But I'm making a different argument here. I am saying that that high salary is not in a bubble and is not in a vacuum and cannot survive on its own. That high salary is possible because there is a lot of people, probably in service professions, domestic workers, your drivers, your chauffeurs, people who are in repair industries, people who are vendors. There are many people in the informal sector who will be getting a much lower salary, but they are very much part of the economic ecosystem of the city. You can't have one without the other. And so I want you to keep this in mind, that we tend to forget in the hierarchy of things that as if we can, just think about each as a separate thing, we forget the systemic connection. In land as well, this kind of a notion sometimes comes in. So there is a term in real estate studies which is called highest and best use. What that basically means, if you have a parcel of land, you can look at it and say, what is the kind of activity that you can do? What is the use that it can have? So you can get the maximum amount of financial returns from it, the highest rent from it. And if you look at it at just one parcel level, then you can say that, okay, fine, I'm going to have a great commercial building, maybe for the IT sector, something that is very expensive, and it will give me the highest financial revenue. But as soon as you change the scale of it, as soon as you're not talking about just the one parcel of land, but many parcels of land, perhaps all of the parcels of land that are in a city, the notion of a highest and best use in its terminology starts to become misleading. Because not every parcel of land can be that commercial building. For one commercial building to exist, there have to be many other parcels of land which will need to have residential. They will need to have a hospital. They will need to have schools. They will need to have infrastructure. They will need to have all of these other uses for the urban economy to come together. And so highest and best use is related to the idea of price. And price is a language that we can use at the scale of a single parcel. As soon as you scale up, the word price doesn't really hold meaning anymore. You have to use the word value. You have to use the word, what is the ecosystem? What are the systemic connections between these different parcels of land? What is the value that is getting generated from each different parcels? How does it contribute to the whole? How do the parts come together into one whole? I'll give you one more example here. Say you have a parcel of land and you build a mall on it. A mall is going to give you very, if it's not also right next to, like Gurgaon did, built, like endless number of malls all right next to each other when Gurgaon was first coming up, and then the malls were not doing well because you need to be unique to kind of get the high revenues from a project like this. Say you build one mall where it has a good, sort of set of people, you might be generating a lot of revenues. But let's think of it as an economic entity. A mall has a lot of goods and products that are sold in a mall, which basically means that there are backward linkages to a lot of small factories, to a lot of MSME units, industrial units, etc., where these products are getting manufactured. Then there's going to be the logistics industry, the trucks and the autos and the tempos that's going to bring that thing to maybe a wholesaler and then to this mall. So those are its backward linkages. In terms of forward linkages, people are coming to the mall to buy things, to consume things. It's also creating employment for all of the people who are staying there. But you take the same parcel of land and say, instead of building a mall, you build a hospital. The hospital also uses medicines, equipment, which are going to be manufactured in units, which are the backward linkages. But the hospital is also, it's going to employ people. It is going to, it's producing output in terms of the health services. But more importantly, it's also creating, reducing, say, the disease burden. It is allowing new children to be born, the next generation of people who are going to be part of the planet. So it is playing a role in social and economic reproduction and production. And those are its forward linkages. And so if you compare a mall to a hospital, and I'm just giving this as an example, in actual cases, this might be different, but a mall may be able to pay you a higher real estate rent, but may have lower economic value. A hospital may be able to pay you smaller, less amount of real estate rent, but will have larger economic value. And so one of the things that I want to really sort of this thing is that rent or price and value are two very different concepts and must be thought about very separately and must be thought about in terms of scale. Price and rent work at micro scales, at single parcel scales. And when we zone out, we have to think about this concept of value, think about the system, think about the systemic connections. So I want to kind of go to the next slide and actually just summarize a little bit about what we have sort of gone through. So just to kind of remember, no new land is being made. Our planet is our planet. We have all of it already. We know how much, what is the extent of it, what are the limits of it. When we use the language about new land or property, it actually indicates the making and the remaking of new spatial connections for land rather than a new product being created. Karl Polanyi called this land is a fictitious commodity, right? So when we take these ideas and we take them to land markets cannot be just seen as a random ordered hierarchy of different rents that different affordability levels can, people can pay. But it actually reflects the connections between the users and activities in a view of a city as a system. And when that system gets skewed, again, I'll give a small example. Mumbai has a severe housing crisis, right? There is definitely more demand for housing than supply of housing in the city. And yet, if you look at it at a city level, the city has 10 to 15% vacancy in housing as well. And why is that? It's because the housing is being created at price levels which is not matching with the price that the demand is set at. This is one example of a system, of a city system which is skewed. So more supply is coming in one niche, but not enough in the other. In Bangalore, we are beginning to see another way in which the system is getting skewed. We have many parts of the cities that have been sort of reclaimed from lakes, Rajkalves, areas that were low-lying, and there is buildings that have come up in all of these areas, which now is creating and exacerbating and making worse the flood events that the city is seeing. Flood events on one side, the second is groundwater depletion. So because there are so many people and not all of them have access to the city grid Kaveri system, they dig bore wells. So they are consuming the groundwater at rates which is higher than its rate of replenishment. And so again, going forward, are we actually going to see maybe investments leaving Bangalore or moving to other cities where there isn't so much of a water problem? This is again, so the systemic view of rents and investments have to be thought about not in isolation, but in connection with one another, right? Which leads to the next point, that the whole city cannot have in what in real estate terms is called the highest and best use. You can't just try and monetize at the highest level for every parcel of land. There will be no city ecosystem. There will be no economic system. It will all fall apart. And finally, that rent or price is at the scale of one parcel of land, or maybe a couple of parcels of land. It's a micro view. But value is at the scale of the city. And that value can come from a lot of different functionalities that land parcel can take. Economic, social, infrastructure, ecological, intersections of any of these. And so, if this is the provocation, then how do we fundamentally rethink land and land markets when we think about urbanization, when we think about urban transformations, when we think about urban futures, right? So I'm hoping that these are some of the things that we will be able to discuss in greater length. Hope to see many of you in class. At IIHS and in the UFP, the way that we will take this is we will study land markets, but we will also study the land economy. We will study it in terms of political economy. We will study it in terms of political ecology. All of these frames are essential to be read together if we are going to understand how land is playing a role in urban transformations. And sort of, take the step forward to say, if we understand this about land, then how would we rethink land policy, economic policy, industrialization policy, environmental policy, or any of our interventions in terms of infrastructure or housing, etc., in the city. So with that, I will stop. I hope that we have the chance for much longer conversations. I hope to see many of you apply to the Urban Fellows program. I am going to now, so thank you very much. I am now going to hand it over back to Smita to close us out. Thanks.